And what our role is here in the state is, as far as agriculture goes, is we are in every county. So every county in the state's got an extension office, and we're here basically the research that's done at all those universities, at Auburn and Tuskegee and Alabama A&M, where it's ag related. We're here on a local basis to work with our local farmers. So whether that be cattle farmers, poultry farmers, row crop farmers, or I deal specifically with home horticulture. So I work with homeowners, small farmers, like under an acre. So the people that sell like at your farmer's market and stuff like that. That's the folks that I work with. But we're here for all the hard work that they do at the universities. Years and years of research on different techniques and practices for farming and all that. We're here on a local basis basically to get that information out. Nobody hears what goes on at the universities. They don't. The public's not privy a lot of times to a lot of the research. And come on in. You by yourself? Okay, I didn't know if you had a group come with you. A lot of that information is just not. The universities don't do a good job of sometimes of relaying that information. So we're here for people to be able to walk in, call us. I'll go make site visits at different properties and help people with horticulture-based needs. So what we're going to talk about today, as quickly as we can, because it's hard to cover 200 years of the history of ag in Alabama. We've come a long ways as far as what has changed in the agricultural world. We're going to look at a little bit about kind of big scale farming, like some things that happened throughout the state, and how it changed ag here in Alabama. Kind of look at what a typical home used to look like, in the 1800s versus what it looks like today. Kind of what some of their needs were versus what we deal with today. And then a little bit, if we've got time, I'll run out of time on the last group, but how some of the things that's happened over the last 200 years has affected some of the native plants and stuff like that's grown here in the state. So we'll see what we can get through. If y'all got any questions, let me know. Feel free to stop me. It does not bother me. So what did a home garden look like? So think about your home, where you live. What it looked like, what it looks like today, and what one might have looked like 200 years ago. Most homes today, have a yard, plants around the home. It's made to give an attractive appearance and make people feel welcome. When they come to your house. 200 years ago, that was a waste of time. They had no need for, come on in. Logs. They had no need for pretty. They weren't focused on pretty. They were focused on surviving. Each family pretty much grew everything that they needed to survive a year there at that property. Okay, so all the vegetables that they would eat for that year, everything was grown there on site. There wasn't an urgent care on every corner or a Walgreens or anything like that to run down and get medicine. The nearest doctor might have been 1-2 days ride away. So they grew a lot of medicinal herbs, things like that to self-treat. Any problems that they might have had, any ailments, things like that. They grew a lot of this stuff and had home remedies for taking care of a lot of the things, like I said, that we would go see a doctor for today, or like I said, run down, that we can kind of self-diagnose ourselves. When we have a cold, we know what to go get down at the drugstore to help with that. They had to do a lot of that through plants that they grew and treated. But most everything they grew was going to be vegetables, something they could eat. Okay, vegetables, fruits, things like that, stuff that would get them through the 12-month period till they could grow again. So basically everything was there. Really the only, what would be considered ornamental today, and when I say ornamental, when I talk about that, I just mean that it's grown for an aesthetic purpose. So something that's attractive or nice to look at. They didn't really focus on that. They did grow big shade trees because obviously they didn't have air conditioner in the 1800s. So that would provide a lot of shade to cool their homes in the summer. Can you imagine summertime here without air conditioner, how hot it would be? So that was really the only plants that they would really grow, with a specific purpose that wasn't to eat something. Home Landscapes did, there was no manicured lawn. Good thing is nobody was out there cutting grass. They didn't have lawnmowers, obviously, or tractors or anything like that back in that time period. Again, that was a waste of space. That was a waste of time. They didn't plan anything like that. Everything had a purpose. Like I said, for the livestock that they cared for, the food that they were going to produce themselves. No space was really wasted. So a landscape home were the exception. That usually meant somebody probably of wealth. If they had the extra money or things like that that they could actually buy some of the food that they lived on throughout the year. So they might have had a more of a landscape, what we think about today, some ornamental plants around the yard, kind of as a showpiece home or something like that. But it was the exception. The crazy thing is, like I said, the ornamentals kind of hit the market in the mid-1800s, so 1850s. The first nursery, I think, was 1860 here in Alabama, where they would sell plants, native plants and stuff like that for people to plant around the home. Today, it's the third largest sector in our ag industry here in Alabama, the nursery business. So it went from totally obsolete to, like I said, today it's a large money maker here in the state. So this would be a typical. Most of these were going to be in the backyards. Like I said, nothing was really viewable. These gardens were put in the back for a purpose. If you know anything about the English gardens, most of these were immigrants from like I said, European countries, stuff like that. This is your typical kind of English garden setup, kind of that courtyard. So a lot of their principles and practices and how they did things and set things up were based on some of the English gardens that they'd grown back in their native country. So they kind of kept that as they come over here. Typical house, like I said, if you can see, it's kind of hard to see a little bit, but no wasted space. Like I said, something's being used. You can see the fencing for livestock in the back areas. Lots of things planted around the home. If you notice, there's no plants. There's nothing like that around the home. Everything's got its purpose there at the house. Here's another one. Now, these folks look like they're doing pretty good. That looks like a pretty substantial home back in that time period. And if you look, as I mentioned, the big trees, there's the big shade trees grown to kind of help shade the home, keep it cool. It's kind of blurry in this, but they actually do have some, like I said, a little bit of what we consider a landscape over here on that side of the home. Like I said, looking at that home, I'm going to say those people are pretty well off. Looks like they're doing pretty well. That would be the exception, not the norm for that time period. So what were they growing? What were they eating back then? Looks pretty familiar. Everything they grew back then, we're still growing today because it does well here, fits our climate well. A lot of these plants come from the Indians that we learned to grow from them, and we still grow them today because they do very well. So your corn, tomato, potato, all this stuff that you would, when I make a call today, when somebody, this looks like the garden I go look at. Nothing's really changed as far as the plants and the types of vegetables that they were growing back then versus what we grow today. Now, I said this is got to last all year, or last them 12 months. It was about 1850, 1860. Everybody familiar with what I talk about when I say like maybe your grandma or your parents or somebody that canned vegetables? Like you have canned tomatoes or in the jars, the pressurized jars. Well, that's how we preserve things now. Well, that didn't come out until about 1850, 1860, somewhere in that time period. So how in the world do you make these vegetables last 12 months? Any ideas on what they might have done to preserve some of these vegetables so they would last them throughout the year? Any ideas? What do we do with cucumbers? What do we make out of cucumbers? Pickles. They pickled stuff. So can you imagine eating a pickled potato? How awful that must have been. Or a pickled tomato or pickled pepper or any of that. But that's the only way that they can make things last throughout the year. So up until the mid to late 1800s, before kind of modern day food preservation came along, they used kind of the pickling practice that we do now specifically for cucumbers and pickles with pretty much everything. Now they did dry things, like they could dry peppers, dry tomatoes, which is still done today. That was another way they preserved some of it, but a lot of it was done through pickle. All right, so now let's kind of move into the large scale kind of agriculture scene. So we're talking now big row crops. So when y'all, I'm sure you don't have to get off Highway 31 or Beltline very far to see big ag fields here, even in Decatur or out in the county. Anybody's family farm? What do y'all farm?
Cattle.
Cattle? Any row crop farmers, anything like that? Soybeans, corn, anything like that? Well, that's kind of what we're talking about here, is kind of how things changed around the turn of the century, around 1800. The cotton gin. Have y'all talked about Eli Whitney in your studies so far in school? He was developed the cotton gin, which revolutionized the cotton industry as far as being able to process it. Who knows what a cotton gin does? It doesn't pick it. What does it do?
Like take the seeds out?
It takes the seeds, so it removes the seeds from the fiber. Well, the average person could remove about 1 pound, they could get the seeds from about 1 pound of cotton in a day. So, I mean, not a whole lot. When the cotton gin came along, one person could do about 40 to 50 pounds a day. So, I mean, it blew up the potential for growing cotton. So what do you think now happened? Cotton was a very lucrative commodity that could be grown. So what do you think happened when that production could really go up? What do you think happened? It blew up. It was a high commodity. Everybody was moving into the Tennessee Valley. It's still, you know, if you cross the Tennessee River Bridge here on 31 or go across on 65, everything's farmland. Pretty much on either side, some kind of row crop, whether it be soybeans, cotton, a lot of corn, just because it's rich, fertile land. So this area got flooded with people moving into the area. Also because of the Tennessee River, you could move your product easily across the state. So cotton became king in the area because it was a very, like I said, a very rich commodity that was able to be grown. Now the negative to it was it took a lot of labor force, and we really saw at that point the slavery number in this area really jumped. It really jumped high. If you see here, 1820 there was about 47,000 in Alabama, all the way up to 435 right around the time of the Civil War. So the cotton gin kind of inadvertently ended up being a major contributor to the Civil War, just because, like I said, everybody flooded this area to grow that crop. Now, in the southern part of the state, or kind of that middle part of the state where the Black Belt is, after the War of 1812, the Creek Indians been there. They defeated the Creek Indians, and they started to establish that area, and cattle and timber in that part of the state became the big market for farming down that way. Now, I just said that the population of people into the state vastly grew. So now some of our staple crops that we grow today, like I said, I don't go to many gardens, but these aren't being grown. A lot of these were brought in, like I said, to some of the slaves that were brought into the area. They brought these crops with them, and they've become staple plants and staple vegetables in our part of the state, across the state. Now, with slavery came new ideas. George Washington Carver, I'm sure y'all talked about him. What's he famous for?
Peanut butter.
With a peanut, right? He's the peanut farmer. He's probably the most distinguished plant scientist that's ever come through in this state, as far as what he accomplished, as far as things that he revolutionized in the ag industry. Some of the things that he came up with, ideas and ways to farm, we still talk about today. And when I meet with folks, last week we talked about his principle of crop rotation. What happened was, like I said, when everybody flooded the area and was starting to grow cotton because it was this high commodity product, cotton really pillages the soil. Okay, so if you grow cotton over and over and over, it really pillages the soil of all the nutrients and the good things that are there for plant material. Well, if I grow that year after year after year, it really depletes that down and my yields start to go down. Okay, so if I got so many bushels this year, next year it reduces and it kept doing that. Well, he came up with the idea of crop rotation, okay, which was plant cotton one year and then follow it up with some type of legume like a soybean or a peanut, okay, because they rebuild soil. They add nutrients back to the soil, which helps when I come back with cotton, which is my main crop that I'm going to plant. It helps with that. It's going to really produce the next year. So we took that and we've gone a lot further with it, from soil-borne diseases and things like that with plants. That were the potato famine that happened in Ireland back in I don't even know what, 1,000 years ago, big potato famine. We was able to conquer that disease with crop rotation. Okay, we coming over here and planting things in different families. All his ideas he came up with at Tuskegee University. Now the problem was farmers didn't want, cotton was very lucrative. Peanuts, there was no market for it. There was really no market for soybeans. Okay, so while they saw the benefits of it, they're like, well, what do I do with all these peanuts? And what do I do with all these soybeans in the alternative years? So he went to trying to figure out things that we could do with the peanut to make it a valuable crop, just like cotton and corn and some of these other things. And he, over his research, he came up with 300 different food, industrial, and commercial uses for the peanut, which is, like I said, most famously what he's known for. But anything from, he came up with hair products, oils, shampoos, not just food items, all kinds of different uses for the peanut that now made that a valuable crop here in the state. One thing he didn't come up with is peanut butter. Most people think he, of all those 300 things that he worked with peanuts, he came up with peanut butter, but it was actually a man in Canada around the same time that actually came up with peanut butter. But his were more, like I said, uses of byproducts of peanuts that he came up with. But he went to bat for the farmers and went to U.S. Congress, and basically he wanted them to create a high tariff on these peanuts, which would make them valuable, okay, for trading purposes and things like that. It kept the peanut value from just kind of being pennies back in that day, and it became a high commodity as well. So now when they were rotating their crops, they had a good cash crop that they could plant in the off-season of cotton that would be some value to the farmer. So we could spend all day talking about the things that George Washington Carver did as far as development in agriculture, and we couldn't touch the surface on all that. He's the only, I think he was the first African American to earn a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, and he was the first non-president in the United States to get his own monument. They built him a monument. He's from Missouri. They built a monument back to him in Missouri for his work in the ag field, and just how many different things he brought to light, and how he changed agriculture, not just across Alabama, but in the way that we farm just in general. So really, really impressive man. Fertilizer didn't exist back then. Okay, so we have all these big fields, or cotton fields, or corn fields, all this stuff. You couldn't go down to the co-op, or you couldn't go down to Lowe's and buy a bag of what we think of as fertilizer today, synthetic fertilizer. Synthetic fertilizer didn't come out until the mid-1800s, so they were using organic materials. Things like, over here on the left, and this was another one of George Washington Carver's studies that he did. He was big in soil amendments and stuff like that, in ways to add organic matter back to the soil, to enrich it and make it better for plants. This on the left is what they call swamp muck. Okay, so if you've ever been down in bogs or around ponds, all that stuff, that old nasty, muddy kind of material that if you step in it, it'll pull your boot off. It's that stuff. But it's got a lot of just dead plant life and stuff from the ponds and the swamps that's died and decayed. It's real rich in organic matter, so they use this to spread over fields and stuff like that. to help fertilize. Now on the right is good old-fashioned horse poop and cow poop, which we still use today. Chicken litter is used by the truckload. We still use it. It's a good nitrogen source. Like I said, it's totally organic. It's relatively cheap. People need to get rid of it, and it's a good byproduct, like I said, for hay fields and things like that. But it was their only options. They didn't have, like I said, synthetic fertilizers that you can go buy by the bag and use on fields. So everything was pretty much hand tools, horse-drawn implements at that time. Can you imagine some of these fields that we passed? Like some of these cornfields that you can't see the end of it, and having to hand plant that, and having to hand pick that. I mean, think about your lives today. How you come to school, you go home. Some of you probably got extracurricular activities that you do after school, or you play a sport, or you something like this. This was your life. This was what you did in every free moment that you had. Now, most people they still want their kids to go to school and get educated, but when you wasn't in school, this is what you were doing. So I mean, it's really impressive to me that they farmed on that scale without a tractor, without a combine, without spray rigs. Herbicides and pesticides didn't come along until nearly the 1900s. So I mean, if you had corn or soybeans and some kind of pests, infested your fields, you just kind of had to watch it and hope it didn't wipe you out completely. None of that came along till nearly the 1900s. Now, everything wasn't positive that we did over the 200 years or so in agriculture. Obviously, most of the people that live in the United States came from somewhere else. Okay, a lot of Europeans, a lot of Asians have just flooded this area. Okay, or in the first wave of kind of population growth here, and everybody wanted a little bit of something from home. So I mean, if you moved from England, you had things from your home, maybe plants or stuff that you like to grow back at home, and you wanted to bring that with you. So it came over on the boat when you came. Or maybe plants from China, or plants from Asia, or from Japan, or something like that. They came with you. And while some of them, wait.
Is Frank Sanchez in here?
While some of them have been great plant additions, have been very helpful to our economy, to wildlife, we've had a lot of plants that have had a big negative impact on our natural forest, our meadowlands, our boglands, things like that. A lot of these plants were very invasive. So what that means is when a plant's invasive, is it has no natural predators, so no natural insects or anything like that naturally feed on that plant. There's not many diseases here in our climate or in our area that affect those plants. So they grow without any kind of control measures whatsoever. So they just take off and they expand and they take over our forest in different parts of our environment. Couple of the ones that we fight today: English ivy. Anybody baseball fan in here? You familiar with the Cubs? The ivy back there? Well, that's actually Boston ivy, but very similar. Looks identical to English ivy, and that plant will just consume areas of forest and stuff like that. They've moved out of landscapes. People use it around their homes for ground covers and things like that. They've moved into our natural forest, into big oak trees in people's yards, and they'll kill, like I said, large mature trees. They choke them out. So they've been very detrimental to some of our wooded areas. Wisteria, this the plant over here that you can see, the purple flowers over here, came from China. We used it everywhere in the landscapes. When ornamentals became a big factor as we approached the late 1800s and 1900s, and people did start focusing on more attractive plants and stuff like that for their landscape. This was a big one. It's a beautiful vine, makes a beautiful flower, but it took over. Okay, so now it's in all of our wooded areas right now. No way to control it, no way to get rid of it. It's taken over to a point we really can't do anything about it. Same thing with honeysuckle, everybody's familiar with honeysuckle. It grows wild everywhere. Another Asian plant, that was brought in, for a fragrance, for an ornamental factor, and we've lost control of it. A couple good ones that came out of it, boxwood, camellias. Boxwood's kind of an English garden type plant. Most formal gardens, it's a high value plant in the ornamental industry. So it's done well. No real problems with it. And camellias. Camellias are our state flower. Something else is made from camellias. Anybody know any camellia trivia or what a camellia plant is? It is our state flower, but anybody like sweet tea? It's what sweet tea is made from camellia leaves. Now there's multiple types of camellias, but one of the species of camellias is where we get our tea from. That's ground up, and we get our sweet tea, unsweet tea, all that comes from the camellia. All right, so why do we care about our natives? What do we care if one plant takes over and it runs off another? What does it really matter? Well, native plants are plant species that were here prior to the arrival of European settlers. So the stuff that was here when the Indians were here, the stuff that was here before anybody stepped foot from the European settlements, those are still what we consider native plants to the year. The thing with native species are they attract certain insects, certain wildlife, things like that, that are specific to those type of plants. So as we see some of these plants that have come in and we've lost control of them, and they eradicate some of our native plants, we lose those insects and we lose that wildlife. Okay, so they not necessarily extinct, but they move on sometimes. Sometimes it can hinder their numbers to a point that they become endangered or something like that, or sometimes they just move on to other areas. So that we don't want to see that. It affects our ecosystems. It affects the way things happen here in our state. So we want to protect those things. We don't want outside plants. We do a lot of work with invasive species. We monitor things. We have things that are on potential lists, potentially invasive, and we monitor. Bradford pears, we've lost, it was a big landscape plant here in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Well, we've lost control of it. What happened was it was a species of plant that we had grown for an ornamental tree, and it reverted back to its parent plant, which was very invasive, very thorny, spreads out of control. It's taken over pastures, people's hay fields, things like that. They can't keep it out. They can't run a bush hog through it because those trees have spread so much that it does damage to their tractors and things like that. So we really focus on trying to protect our native stuff. All right. So Alabama has about 4,000 native plant species. That's pretty much today, which is, we're very lucky. You can see here we rank 5th in plant biodiversity. And we're lucky to have the woodland areas that we have, the different meadowlands, river basins, things like that. We have a very diverse agricultural and wildlife scene here in Alabama. We want to protect that. We look and we say, man, we got 4,000 native plants. We're loaded with plants. We're real biodiverse, but we rank 11th in percentage of native plants considered at risk or extinction. Okay, so that means we've let a lot of our areas, we've lost control of them in a lot of situations with particular plants. It's been brought in over the last 200 years that's really affected our state landscape, not our home landscape, but our state landscape as far as what grows here, what thrives here.
Teachers and students at this time.